Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am super excited because we are going to be chatting about hormones and fat loss and all that comes with that with our special guest today. So, Ashley, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm so excited to be here and speak with your audience.
Well, we were just chatting before because we are doing a podcast swap with our podcasts about, experts and the expertise that comes in and the training, and the certificates. So I'm super excited to have you on because you are so experienced in this field of hormones, and you do have your own personal journey. So before we kind of dive into chatting about everything, can you please introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, so my name's Ashley. I'm a mom of two, and I've been in this industry for almost 20 years. My undergraduate degree is in exercise and nutrition. As soon as I graduated, high school, I graduated high school, knew that I wanted to do something in health and fitness, then went to college, graduated college with my degree in exercise and nutrition. And then from there, I went into working full time at a health and fitness studio, and I loved it. It was actually my internship when I was in college, and it became my full-time job. And it was actually my only full-time job before starting my own company. So I stayed there for almost a decade, and I had only worked at that time in person with clients before doing in person and then transitioning to online coaching, which is what I started in 2019. And it has just been so amazing. But like with every story, my journey also has impacted me and where I am today. And so, a lot of what I wanted to do, especially as I started my online company, was help women in a way that was going to give them lasting change, sustainable change. And so, the work that I do with my clients, it's really not a quick fix, it's not a diet program. I'm not giving my clients a cookie cutter meal plan or system to follow that everyone is also following and doing the same thing. Now, sure, there's some similarities when it comes to eating healthy whole foods and my philosophies on exercise, but the way we implement and the way we do things is very customized. Although I'm a certified personal trainer, nutrition coach, I specialize in hormonal health, which I actually went on to do after I graduated college and started my full-time job. I was working with clients. I was actually even working with athletes when I initially started my career. And then I started to transition just to working with women 35 plus. I'd say majority of my clientele were between the ages of 40, probably 40 and 50 years old. As I started to see that the workouts weren't enough, the nutrition tips on a base level weren't enough, and that people needed more support. But women that were doing everything right, working out, trying to be conscious of what they were eating, not overeating, getting in their steps, really weren't seeing their results. And so then I went on to do advanced certifications, and I followed my boss's steps and wanted to specialize in hormones, specifically as it pertains to sustainable fat loss and weight loss. But I specialize more for women specifically. So I don't go into men, although there's lots of experts that do. I really stayed with women. And so as I was going through my career and learning all of this, a lot of my journey was also tied into this as well. And when I was in my teens and early 20s, so much of my self worth became very much so attached to the scale. And unfortunately, I developed a very unhealthy relationship with the scale. And so much of my self worth and identity was attached to trying to look a certain way. And I had this image of what a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and someone that knew what they were doing should look like. And at that time, Instagram and TikTok and all of those things weren't really going. And so it was mostly magazine covers that I was looking at. So I was seeing these beautiful personal trainers, beautiful nutritionists that were, had beautiful muscles and bodies. And so I just thought, well, if I want to be good and if I want to be viewed as a knowledgeable and certified personal trainer and nutrition coach, I need to look the part. And so throughout my own journey, I got very wrapped into crash dieting and just doing a lot of things. And so I made a lot of notes. And as I was working with my clients, specifically in that demographic, through my training, I started to see the correlations as well between your hormones and how your hormones impact your fat loss, how your hormones impact your metabolism. A lot of what I was dealing with was metabolic adaptation, elevated cortisol, pretty severe adrenal fatigue. My female hormones were also totally depleted. And I started to see that for me, a lot of my hormone profile was mimicking a woman that was going through perimenopause or even menopause at certain times. And so I was able to see that and then start making corrections. And then over the years of doing this, being able to create a program that is very much so tailored to helping each client at their own pace, very customized, get through their journey.
Mm. Well, I'm sure a lot of listeners, that are listening in can definitely relate to your story. I know I can in the, trying to look a certain way and restrict food intake and having that image in my brain that, you are supposed to look this certain way if you are working in the health and wellness field. And then, obviously, I think, there really was a time where it was cardio driven, exercise for women. Like you have to really get that cardio in, and weight training wasn't as popular. And I think now that we know more about the influence of what happens when our hormones start to change as we reach perimenopause and menopause, that strength training really needs to become part of our regular routines to help with some of those hormone changes and to help with our maintaining muscle mass, increasing muscle mass, bone mass, and all of those things too that can be affected as we age. So before we, I think one thing to highlight too is you mentioned fat loss, but what's
Mhm.
the difference? Most women are probably always just thinking about losing weight, but not actually
Yeah.
losing fat. So what's the difference between the two?
So when you focus in on losing body fat, it's totally different. So when you look at a program, really what you're going for is fat loss. A lot of us, when we look in the mirror, we want to lose body fat. So when we go to put on our pants and maybe we feel like our stomach is hanging over, we have a lot of skin or body fat, as we like to call it. Some clients say, "Oh, I have all of this skin and stuff." And I'm like, "Well, is it skin? Or is it body fat?" And so we'll go over, we'll look at photos, we'll talk through in detail, and we'll, determine for each client. Because if you did lose a lot of weight, you could have loose skin versus body fat. But fat loss is more focused on specifically losing body fat. So the way that you go about your journey is going to look different compared to just trying to simply lose weight. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the science, but whenever you start a program, regardless of it being sustainable or not, but sustainable is going to be a way better outcome. When you are losing weight on the scale, it's going to be water, it's going to be body fat, and you're going to probably lose a little bit of muscle mass along the way, especially if you're losing a lot of weight. I'm talking, maybe 15, 20, 30, 40 pounds. What you want, though, is that percentage of muscle mass that you're losing to decrease significantly. And you do that by eating enough protein, by strength training and applying enough stress to the muscle. Other forms of exercise can help with that as well. So there's a lot that we can do to protect our muscle tissue because we want to try and keep the muscle tissue around. So there is a big difference. Also, with fat loss, you may not notice the same amount of decrease on the scale. So for example, there's many women that go through my program where the primary goal is always fat loss with the way we approach things. Yes, we'll see the scale go down, but we mostly see inches lost. And we also see not only inches lost, but the progress photos look amazing. And so when we look at two pictures, it could be the exact same weight or maybe even 3 to 5 pound difference between the two. The photo where the transformation has occurred, you're going to think they look like a totally different person and maybe even lost more weight. So fat loss is really focusing on losing body fat while maintaining your muscle tissue. And when you're going more for just, I'm going to start a fasting diet tomorrow, I'm only going to eat once a day, have a shake in the morning, maybe another shake later on in the day, consume less than 1,500 calories, you're going to lose weight, but you're also going to lose a lot of muscle mass. And you may end up maintaining that body fat while losing muscle mass. So although you're losing weight, it's not the kind of weight that you want to lose. So when you look in the mirror, you're still not happy with the way that you look. You still feel like your body maybe is soft. You're not fitting in your clothes well. Your pant size isn't decreasing. And you're also noticing in the gym or when you're doing Pilates, like for you, or my women that are doing strength training, you're not getting stronger and you could be getting weaker. So that's sometimes what weight, just pure weight loss can look like. So sustainable fat loss, the goal is to really try sustain muscle tissue and build muscle if we can to get you through that, where you're just losing body fat. So you're going to see circumference inches down in your waist, your hips, your thighs, your bicep, and progress photos, which I highly recommend everyone take. You're going to be able to see noticeable differences between the before and the after photos.
And in general, I would say it's really fat loss that majority of people are aiming for. But I think we've been trained so much to think of it being weight and getting on the scales and making sure that the scales are going down, that we're probably not, as you said, targeting the right areas or doing the right combination of nutrition and strength training that really targets that fat loss. We just are so focused on it being weight loss.
Right, right. And sadly, that can pull us away. And I see this often, having done this now for almost 20 years, worked with hundreds of women online and tons of women in person. When I did that, you will see, and I've seen this, when you're going through this, you will see your body transforming. But if you're so focused on the scale, you will overlook the progress you're making elsewhere. You will overlook potentially the inches lost because maybe you're not even measuring that. You will not pay attention to the improvements in your strength and a strength training workout or a Pilates workout, which also incorporates your physical strength and being able to maintain your body better and hold positions or get through movements more efficiently. And so I really do think you need to look at the larger picture. When I'm measuring a client's progress, the scale is actually the last thing I like to look at. I will pay attention to other biofeedback markers, how you're feeling, your energy, your digestion, your sleep, your cravings, and if your appetite is managed well. And then we go on to look at your inches lost, measuring waist, lower stomach, specifically for women going through perimenopause, maybe in their late 30s, 40s, and 50s, thighs, hips. So we target all of the main areas as well as progress photos every month, because that's how, especially being online, that's how we're measuring the progress. When I was in person, I used to do a 12-site body fat analysis on all of my clients. Now, if you want to get some detail about your body composition, you can always do a bod pod. There's lots of ways, a DEXA scan to measure your muscle mass to body fat ratio. But I would do the 12-site in-person caliper test on all of my clients and check them every other week. And when I did this, those that were really following the protocol well, custom to them, they would see a lot of fat loss and we would see the sites go down. Sure, the scale would generally come down, but it wouldn't be 5 pounds a week or anything like that. On the opposite side, though, I have had clients come in that were not necessarily following the protocol, well, chronically under eating, not strength training, maybe doing the 1 or 2 sessions with me, but outside of that, doing nothing else all day. And I would see the inches go up. And at times, the scale weight will stay the same or even go down when they're not losing body fat. And so the client would say, well, I'm losing weight. Shouldn't I be losing body fat? And I'm like, well, you may be losing a kind of weight that you don't want to lose, which is your muscle. So try really hard to not get too attached to the scale. Focus more on everything else that I've just mentioned.
Well, I think that's great advice, and it might not be easy to do, but if you've got those
I
other
know.
things to focus on, you can at least start to make that change as well. And I want to talk about hormones because, as you were sort of saying, your sort of main age of women you work with is 35 plus, and that's when women do start to potentially go through perimenopause or start to feel the changes of it occurring, and then obviously eventually menopause. So why do our hormones become so important if we are trying to either maintain weight or lose weight in this period of our lives?
Such a great question, and they become so important. And I really wish that there was a way to get this out to more women because I do think until recently, which I know we talked about this a little offline, perimenopause wasn't even a topic that people talked about or a word that we used when we talked about our hormones. I'm thinking back even 10 years ago when I was doing this, but your hormones are critical. And when you turn, it's sadly, and I think, it could be for many reasons, environmental changes, a lot of extra stress we have on us. But sadly, there are women as early as the age of 35 that's starting to go through perimenopause, and maybe even some have already finished the full transition by 40. But generally speaking, most women around the age of 40 are going to start going through what we call perimenopause, which is essentially your hormones are starting to shift. Now, I don't want anyone to get nervous or worried. And I do think that, especially with what we see online, it can almost feel really scary to think about going through these natural changes. But I just want to shine the light and say that this is a very natural transition that all of us women are going to experience. Myself, you, all of us as women. It is normal for our hormones when they start to shift, and they will start to shift. Now, the one thing I want to say specifically related to your weight loss and your fat loss, to pull it back into your question, is it's very much so going to impact your ability to lose weight. But I do feel like I would be doing a disservice right now if I didn't shine the light to say that it's also going to impact so many other categories of your life and your quality of life, from your energy to how well you're sleeping to, if you're waking up multiple times in the night to urinate, to your libido, to vaginal changes. So there's a lot of other changes, but just specific to the weight loss and fat loss, when your hormones start to shift, if you're not doing certain things, which we'll get into, when your hormones start to shift, and if you're trying to lose weight as well, and you're not taking the necessary steps to keep things balanced or protect your muscle mass, you will start to notice muscle loss. You will start to notice that it's easier for your body to gain weight. You will start to notice body composition changes. And, maybe suddenly you're starting to see body fat appear in the lower stomach near your hip bone or your suprailiac and into your hips. You may start to notice that when you're doing your workouts, your body's not recovering as well. Or maybe you used to be able to eat carbs, but suddenly your body's not responding as well and your A1C is higher or your fasting glucose is higher. And as you're going through this, you're just sitting back and you're thinking, why am I gaining weight? I used to be able to eat certain foods that now my body can't tolerate anymore. Why am I gaining body fat in these places that I didn't used to carry it? And a lot of times it's really scary when you are health conscious and you are active and you are working out and you are conscious of what you're eating. And a lot of the women I see are actually dieting and also seeing these changes occur. So it is really important. And there's a lot that you can do to get your hormones more balanced as you go through these transitions. I want to add on one more hormone to this, and it's cortisol. Regardless of your age, it could be 20, 30, 40, 50, or beyond. Cortisol is also another hormone that's going to impact your ability to lose body fat, which, remember, body fat is really what we want to lose here. We don't want to lose muscle. And all of us are going to lose water weight initially when we start a diet, but we really want to go more for fat loss. Cortisol, especially in today's times where we're all maxed out, that alone can wreck your hormones, impact your insulin. So that's going to impact your blood sugar and your insulin resistance, especially if you're perimenopause. You may already start to notice some shifts there. It can impact your sex hormones. And this alone is going to impact your cycles, your monthly period, if you're still menstruating every month. That's going to impact it. But if you're also simultaneously going through perimenopause where you're experiencing some changes in your cycle, in your mood, in your sleep, in your body fat distribution, it's going to make it so much worse. So we have to look at your hormones, but we need to make sure that we're starting off with a couple of the big hormones, primarily being your cortisol and your insulin at first. Once we start there, they're the powerhouses. It's going to have an impact on your estrogen, on your progesterone, on your thyroid, which then is going to impact your metabolism and improve the way that you lose body fat.
Well, that makes perfect sense because that's all the things that I talk about with my clients as well. But for someone that's listening in and they're thinking, oh, yeah, I probably then, if they're the two big things to focus on, cortisol and insulin, where should I start? Or what are some simple things that I can do just to potentially become more aware of them and then bring them down if I need to?
Yes, that's a great question. So, number one, I highly recommend for everyone to get their labs ran, fasting labs once a year. So let's take a look at your A1C. Let's take a look at your fasting glucose. Your fasting glucose is going to give us some insight, but really, even if you wake up and have coffee in the morning, maybe if you have 2 or 3 cups, like many people do, and have your fasting labs ran, it can increase your blood sugar a bit. So in a way, when you look at your labs, it's going to look higher than it really is. So let's look at your A1C. So once a year, get your labs ran, your TSH, your T3, your T4, your A1C. And then again, you can look at that fasting glucose, but it's not going to give you the full picture like the A1C would. So take a look and see where you're starting there. And that will give you some insight on if you have if there is something that you should be concerned about or start working on. But also, your body fat distribution can say a bit about how your body is managing your blood sugar. For example, if you're storing body fat more on the suprailiac or your love handle region, which I hate to call it that, but around your hip bone, if that's where you find that you're storing excess body fat, that is related to insulin, which is your blood sugar. It's going to regulate your blood sugar, that hormone. If you're storing in the front of your stomach, like the apple shape is what we like to call it. Maybe if you Google that, you can see the pear shape and the apple shape as a woman. That's more related to cortisol. So let's break it down. With cortisol, there's a couple of things that you can start doing. And unfortunately, some of it is a little bit harder to change because we really do need to get to the root cause of the stressors in our life. A lot of us are living in just a very overstimulated state. Our nervous system is maxed out. That alone is keeping cortisol producing in our body all the time and fatiguing our adrenal glands. That is going to create fatigue. It's going to create, irritability. It's going to impact our sleep quality, our recovery. It's going to impact our body fat, specifically in the front of the stomach. So we need to troubleshoot what is causing the stress. As a mom of two with a 6 and an 8-year-old and a business, I'm a wife, I get it. There are some stressors in our life that are really great, and we don't want to eliminate, but we know, okay, I need to try and get things a little bit more balanced because I'm too maxed out. So you can start small, maybe looking at your schedule. What's really creating a lot of stress in your life? Is there a way for you to have better boundaries in your life? Maybe it's having your husband or partner take the children so you can go on a nice leisure walk to start your weekends off right, or go to the grocery store and food prep, or sleep in an extra hour, or it's changing your bedtime routine so you can get sleep and help your hormones in your body. That work takes a while though. So, to give your audience some little tips that they could start doing, if you feel like you are in a constant state of being stressed out, you feel like you're gaining inches in your midsection, you feel like you're wired, but you're exhausted, you're living off of caffeine all day, or you feel like you need energy drinks, you're having a hard time staying asleep or falling asleep, you're waking up multiple times throughout the night, those are all signs that your cortisol could be too high. When you wake up in the morning, you have to have immediately caffeine and just pretty much stay caffeinated throughout the day to get through your workouts. When you work out, you feel exhausted afterward. You should never feel so exhausted you need to take a nap. That is a sign that there's something going on. So you can start your day off with what I like to call my adrenal cocktail. So you take half of a fresh squeezed lemon, some really high quality sea salt, some good quality water, filtered water, just about 4 ounces. It doesn't have to be a ton. You could do 8 if you want more. And you can drink that in and drink it down, actually. So you drink that all the way down. And you can add a little bit of raw honey to get some extra minerals if you need that. So that vitamin C is going to nourish your adrenal glands, and that's going to be really great for you. So that can help get your body a little bit more balanced before you start your day. And then I would say really make sure you're monitoring your caffeine intake. And this does include things like pre-workout. I know many women that's in their 30s, 40s are relying on pre-workout supplements with caffeine just to get through their session. So I would say get rid of them altogether. Maybe start supplementing with a high quality electrolyte powder that has no caffeine in it. Maybe if you want some amino acids, that's something great that you can do that's not bad for your body at all, but limit your caffeine. If you are dealing with elevated cortisol, having a lot of caffeine is definitely going to elevate your cortisol even more and only contribute more to everything I just mentioned. So try and cut yourself back. I know it can be challenging if you are drinking multiple cups to go to zero. So maybe try to cut it back by 50%. Or if you're having 3 cups, could you go to 2? Could you go to 1.5? And really try and get it to where you're just having 1 a day and preferably not first thing in the morning. Start off with your adrenal cocktail, get in some protein fiber, make sure that you're starting your day off with the whole protein. I would not suggest intermittent fasting for this individual. I do think to get your hormones balanced, if you're fasting, that's only going to elevate cortisol more. So break your fast, but eggs, go for high proteins like eggs, or maybe you could even do a protein shake mixed with avocado, a half a cup of berries, an unsweetened milk, or just something that doesn't contain a lot of sugar. If you don't like that, you could do Greek yogurt, berries, and nuts, but you're really looking for protein and fiber, but having some healthy fat mixed in that as well. So maybe it could be eggs with some berries. You could build a healthy meal. I have tons of suggestions on my Instagram, on my website, and on my podcast. And the last thing with the cortisol would be take a look at what you're doing for exercise. If you're doing tons of cardio, tons of Orange Theory classes, spin classes, high intensity workouts, I would suggest scaling it back and really focusing on more basic strength training where your heart rate's not getting super elevated, you're lifting heavy weights, but heavy can be relative to you. Maybe for you, heavy's 5 pounds or 10 pounds or 15 pounds, but you're lifting heavy weights and you're walking, working in something like Pilates would be great as well, where you're focusing more on, not overstimulating your body, allowing your nervous system to still stay calm so your body will know that it's safe. So that's specific for cortisol. For insulin, it actually kind of ties in with a lot of what we said, but specific to nutrition. You really want to take a hard look at what you're eating. And if you notice that your body is becoming more insulin resistant, then you want to take a hard look at what kinds of carbs are you eating and are you eating enough protein? Remember, every single meal needs to include a whole protein. It could be yogurt, a high quality protein powder, eggs, meat, seafood. If you're vegan, we can combine things and make whole proteins for you. So like rice and beans, maybe you could go for lentils. There's a lot of options, but we really want to make sure all of your meals are containing a whole protein and you are monitoring the processed sugars and or even the carbs that convert to sugar more easily. So that would even be things like pastas and breads and tons of fruit every day. Those things, fruit is not bad. But if you are dealing with insulin resistance, probably having 3 bananas and an apple and an orange and some berries in addition to having all of your other carbs, it's not going to be great for your body. So maybe start with 1 to 2 servings of fruit a day. Have some whole food carbs, quinoa, high quality oatmeal, making sure maybe you're working in some beans, rice is okay. So you can have some carbs, but be a little bit more select and make sure every single meal contains a protein. And I would even say shooting for the upwards of about 35 grams of fiber per day.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening in thinking, oh, I probably don't eat 35 grams of fiber a day. I mean, the stats show that most people don't. But as you were saying, if we're going back to those whole foods and we're including things like beans and lentils and vegetables and whole grains, it's much more easy to hit that sort of 30 to 35 grams of fiber, but we're not going to find that fiber in processed foods and sugars nearly as much.
Right. And it really does start with the basics. And so before you go into, and within my community and my programs, depending on where the individual is starting, if we have metabolic damage or underlying hormonal issues, there's different ways that we will suggest for our client to track their food. But if you are getting started on this journey, I highly recommend that you at least write your food down in some form of a food journal. If you're open to logging your food in a tracking app, that's okay. I'm not a fan of you going off of the tracking app's suggestions for you. Those are very standardized and cookie cutter. It doesn't take you as an individual into consideration outside of asking you some very generic questions everyone's asked. And oftentimes you're usually set below where you need to be. So just for the sake of being able to log your food and see your fiber grams, sometimes utilizing a tracking app can help with that because you can actually go to your nutrition profile and it'll show you how many grams of fiber you're consuming. But I just wouldn't pay attention to all of the other numbers if you're not working with someone that's helped customize them for you. If that's not your thing, then I would say making sure that you're writing down what you're consuming. And then later on, you can even go back and look online and confirm how much fiber and protein you're getting in those foods. That does take a little bit more time and effort versus an app that's just going to tell you based off of your serving. But you want to make sure that it's accurate. You want to make sure if you are actually utilizing a tracking app that you're measuring your portions. Otherwise, if it's a guesstimate, you're just not really sure how much you're eating. So we don't know how accurate that data is. But both ways work. I have clients that have done wonderful utilizing something like a tracking app, obviously with customized information that myself or my assistant coach has given them, or for those that are just totally against that and that's not for them, logging it in a notebook or even on the notes on their phone, and then just spending some time going through and trying to figure out, okay, well, a half of an avocado, which actually has a lot of fiber in it, okay, well, I got 7 grams of fiber, 8 grams of fiber from that. Great. Raspberries, oh goodness, that's another 10 grams almost. So you can start going through your foods and identifying where you're getting the fiber and where you're getting the protein from.
Mm. And you mentioned metabolic damage, which I think a lot of people might not be familiar with. How have they caused metabolic damage? And if they have, what can they do to try to heal that?
Yes. So metabolic damage is something that a woman will experience, or really anyone, it's not specific to women, when you have been chronically dieting for a prolonged period of time. So if you are someone that has been dieting for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, or even someone that's been dieting for just a couple of years, but not taking any breaks. So maybe you started, let's say, Weight Watchers, and you have just been on that diet for 1, 2 years nonstop with no breaks, or you bounced from diet program to diet program and you're always dieting. That is generally what's the primary cause of metabolic adaptation. So, metabolic damage is metabolic adaptation. And that means your metabolism has down regulated from chronically dieting. So your metabolism and your hormones actually work together. And that's why here within my company, Metabolic Fix, we really double down on both of those because not every woman actually has severe hormonal problems, but some are dealing with metabolic adaptation. And so if you have metabolic adaptation, your metabolism has downregulated and it's burning fewer calories than what it should be burning. So you could be on a diet right now, consuming 1,200 calories a day and not losing weight and wondering why. That could be because your metabolism has adapted. Now, with metabolic adaptation, it's not going to happen just because you were sick with the flu and couldn't eat for a week. It happens when, again, you've been in that prolonged state of dieting, which is a stressor on your body. So your metabolism is going to downregulate to match your energy input. The energy is the foods and calories you consume. So all foods, good and bad, has calories, and our bodies are going to try to utilize those calories, regardless of how healthy or not healthy the food is. But if you're not taking in enough to meet your individual nutritional needs, your metabolism will be able to pick up on that and it will downregulate. Here's something I want to highlight about metabolic adaptation, also known as metabolic damage. When this happens, if you have a lot of muscle mass, because maybe you've worked out, maybe you're a very muscular woman, your body will also start breaking down that muscle tissue to utilize for energy. Muscle tissue is very metabolically active tissue. If you're not fueling it, it will go away. Back to your original question with weight loss versus fat loss, it is a lot easier for your body to sustain body fat compared to muscle. So that's why when I was doing the 12 site caliper test on clients, those that weren't following the protocol well, that were chronically under eating, were dealing with metabolic adaptation. And in that case, your body's not going to keep this super metabolically active tissue, which is muscle mass, around that has this demand for calories. So your body will break that down, utilize it, get rid of it because it's too needy, to put in simple terms, and it's easier to sustain that body fat. So what happens is now you're burning fewer calories, you're not responding to your diet, you're losing muscle mass, which is also dropping your basal metabolic rate, which is your BMR. And so you're just caught in this vicious cycle. A lot of women think I need to work out harder and I need to eat less, which then that increases our cortisol even more. If you're eating, let's say, low fat, fat free processed foods, that's going to bump up your blood sugar, which again is going to trigger insulin. And then you add on perimenopause, where your hormones, your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone, which is your muscle building hormone, are starting to decline. And potentially your thyroid's being impacted from the chronic and prolonged dieting and stress on your body. That's really a formula for you not feeling like your best self, not just the scale, but physically you're not going to be feeling like your best self internally, your mindset. And so that's how a lot of times there's a big intertwine between the metabolic health and the hormones.
Well, thank you for that, comprehensive, explanation, because I think that's an area that we don't think about a lot is, we hear as we age, our metabolism slows down, but we just think there's not much we can do about it. But there is a lot we can do about it, but we have to make the right adjustments with our, nutrition and our exercise and support our hormones in order to maintain our muscle mass and our metabolic rate or our metabolic health.
Right, exactly. And we our metabolism will slow down as we get older because we're losing muscle mass. And so we need to do more to sustain muscle mass. And research is showing when we are building muscle mass and sustaining muscle mass versus losing it, our metabolic rate will stay high if we are also eating correctly and strength training. And so you can actually build muscle mass into your 30s and 40s and totally reverse that to where your metabolism and your metabolic rate increases versus decreases more. So there's a big correlation with metabolic health in your muscle tissue. And in general, as women, we are going to start losing muscle mass as early as 30, and the percentage can increase as we get older. But we can do a lot to stop that from happening and increase our muscle tissue, which will increase our metabolism.
And I have to ask about HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, because I think that's really having its time at the minute. It was very, there was a period there after the report came out in the early 2000s about there being a link to breast cancer. And then they have, since come out, and that's all been debunked. But women, for 20 years or so were steering clear of HRT because they were told that it did increase their risk of breast cancer as well as other cancers. And now I feel like there is a shift going back to returning to looking to take HRT and even taking it potentially earlier when you're starting to have those perimenopause symptoms. So can you chat a little bit about HRT and, its place when we are going through perimenopause?
Sure, I would love to talk about this. Just full disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor. That's not something that I can do is diagnose my clients, but I do see a lot of women that are, again, right in that area of perimenopause or even menopause. And one of the things I see quite often through a Dutch test, which is actually a urine test that I run, and we can look at hormones from cortisol to sex hormones. And it actually gives you a little bit of, well, actually, not just a little bit, it gives you a lot of data about your metabolism, about your hormones. And it does take some of the just, well, is this really happening with me, or are we just assuming? It gives you a definite answer. I do see women that have very depleted hormones, either it be through Dutch testing that we found out in combination with blood tests, or they just get their labs tested through their doctors, and we see that the estrogen isn't there, the progesterone isn't there, the testosterone is zero. I have read labs recently where literally the testosterone was zero, and the estrogen, I think, was just about the same level. It wasn't even detected. And this was, these are younger women, 40 years old, 42 years old, where their hormones were depleted way more than they should be. And so you're right. Years ago, there was this big study done, and let's just say the research for HRT at that time, they were saying showed, just like you said, that it would cause a lot of cancers. And we pretty much just ran from HRT. It wasn't even something I think a lot of doctors talked about. I have some clients that are doctors that actually prescribe it to their clients. And I had one of my clients that's a doctor come on my own show and talk about this. But, I feel like if your hormones are depleted, here's something I want for you to know. If your hormones are not there, and maybe when you get your labs ran, the estrogen, the progesterone, the testosterone just is not there, eating healthy and working out, strength training, doing healthier forms of movement, that is not going to take your hormones back up to where they should be totally on their own. Now, it will support your home hormonal health. It will get things more balanced if you're seeing some roller coaster rides throughout the month. I have seen women's cycles return to normal, healthy cycles. They're not too heavy, they're not too long. But if you are coming in at zero and your hormones are so depleted, yes, will eating healthy and eating your protein help your testosterone levels and build muscle mass? Sure, it will definitely help. But I do think it's worth your time to consider. At that point, you could go down more of an herbal approach and maybe try some additional supplements to see if we can get some things going. Maybe things are a little imbalanced, but I do suggest, if you are seeing no improvement, to please make sure you're having this discussion with your doctor, because the research now is showing that that study that was done, the Women's Health Initiative, there was so much false information in that. And I highly recommend, it is worth your time to be your own health advocate, speak with your doctor, talk about your specific needs. Now, I don't know your listeners personally, each one listening in. There are certain types of cancers and different things that you may want to be sensitive to when it comes to HRT, but that is something you can talk with your doctor about. There's even some cases where I've done research where it says certain women with certain types of breast cancer could talk to their doctor that previously had it and see if there's certain forms of HRT that would be okay with them. So, for example, the topical estrogen, the estrogen that a woman would insert inside of her vagina, isn't going to have a same systemic effect on her as if she took it in a different format. So if she's dealing with, if she's dealing with incontinence, which is a side effect to having low estrogen, or frequency in urinating, so, feeling like she has to pee multiple times a night, as you mentioned on my show, prolapse and some different changes there are different forms. So I wouldn't throw it out the window. I would say, please make sure you're talking with the doctor that has a lot of knowledge when it comes to HRT. There's many different ways that you can utilize HRT, and explore it for yourself and see if it's something that you need. Because I have heard from many clients that felt like it was a great fit. It was a life-changing experience for them. A life-changing experience, and not just related to weight. This is a larger discussion about their overall quality of life.
And I love that you talk about having those options and having those conversations, because I've had clients too that have dialed in their exercise and nutrition, and they have seen some improvement, but not enough that, that they feel, they often say, my moods are still erratic, or I'm still really tired, or, not enough to really make those life changes. And then they go on HRT and they combine that with those healthy changes, and then they feel amazing with the two together. But as you said, it's not for everybody, and it depends on your health history and where your hormones are at and what stage you're at. But I think the more we can have these conversations with our doctors and our health practitioners, the better off we're going to be individually, and as women as a whole in the long run too.
I totally agree. When it comes to hormone balance, it is a full lifestyle change. It is not just changing your exercise. It is not just eating your protein or having an adrenal cocktail. It is a full, comprehensive you improving your overall lifestyle to support better health and optimal hormone function. Your weight, the scale weight, your body fat percentage, that is a part of it, but not the full puzzle. It is you as a whole. And so we have to have an open mind, in my opinion, to considering things like HRT, especially with the research out. And so when you really start to look at the research more recently, it really does, if you're reading the research, makes you pause and say, is this something maybe I should consider or talk to my doctor about when this happens to me, depending on my symptoms? Or if you're going through it now, maybe you're working with someone like myself, a coach, or someone like you that has a lot of experience and expertise. You're eating your protein, you're avoiding the processed foods, you're working out, you're walking, you're managing your stress, but your symptoms are getting worse. Your labs are also confirming that, and there's nothing else you could do. And there's many women I work with as well, after they dial in nutrition, lifestyle, and exercise, that will add on certain supplements that help with estrogen detoxification or progesterone. And let's say maybe you've been taking it to that level and you've added on extra supplements and you're still not seeing improvement. I do think that it's a great discussion to have with your healthcare provider and go over your health history, your story, your goals, your age, where your hormones are. Because a lot of times I think we think of HRT and being they're going to take massive amounts of these hormones. Some people really only need micro doses to feel great. Some women only need estrogen, that they have to insert vaginally 2 or 3 times a week, and their tissue health improves. Obviously, their sexual life improves. They don't feel like they're dealing with incontinence. They don't have the frequency to urinate over and over again or waking up in the middle of the night multiple times. And that's with something super simple. So I think too, just talking to your doctor and making sure that it's something that they know a lot about, so they can truly look at you as a whole and determine if this is a good time, or if maybe you should wait a little while to try other things first, or let's see where things are in another 6 months or 3 months and then go from there.
Mm. And we've touched a lot about hormones and fat loss and, perimenopause and menopause today. But is there anything that you feel like that we haven't covered that maybe we should highlight to some listeners as well?
So the thing that I want to cover is that I know that this can be a lot of information coming at you, from, building muscle mass to the importance of that, your hormones, perimenopause, going through perimenopause, the transition, how it can impact your fat loss and your overall health, and even the discussion of HRT, which we could talk about that alone for an hour or more. But I want for you to know that you're not alone. And I do remember myself, I was in my 20s and I had hormones that looked like someone that was already through menopause. And a lot of that was self-inflicted through chronically dieting, metabolic adaptation, overtraining. I lost my monthly cycle. I depleted my hormones. And in that case, they actually did return. So just because your hormones are potentially depleted doesn't mean that they're not going to return. And they could, by simply changing your lifestyle habits. But I want to say that there's a big difference between that and going through true perimenopause and menopause later in life, where your hormones start to change. So I know that there's like a lot of there's a lot of information coming at you if you're listening in, but you're not alone. And I truly do believe, and this is what I do for a living, that with the right approach, the right team of help, you can get to feeling good again. And really, the basics do work. It doesn't have to be complicated. And when I say customized and tailored to you, I mean literally tailored to you and customized to you in a fashion that's going to support you with where you are in your life and not feel overwhelming. You should never go through your journey feeling overwhelmed or like you can't do it. And you don't have to navigate this alone. So I think if you're going through this and maybe you're experiencing some of these symptoms, having someone that has a lot of experience, please make sure you're asking about training and credentials. I also advise, even if you have a great coach with a level of expertise of my expertise, or maybe even close to mine or somewhere around there, when it comes to the HRT discussion, please make sure you're speaking with a medical doctor as well, where you could get, help at that level. But you're not alone. With the right type of support and help, you can truly start to feel better one step at a time. It doesn't have to be 10 steps right now. And don't feel bad, because even as an expert, I was caught into dieting and being really hard on my body. I was very ashamed and embarrassed. And finally, I just ripped the band-aid off and said, I'm going to share my story, because if I did this to myself as an expert, I want other women to know that are just out here living their life with none of this training, that they're not alone if they're going through it too. So you're not alone, and you can get to feeling great again too.
Well, and also, over the years, the information that has come out has changed. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was go low fat, really focus on changing everything to low fat, but sugar's okay. And now it's all get rid of the sugar and bump up the good fat. So if you are just a consumer and you haven't done any, formal education in nutrition, it can be really hard to kind of find the right information and to keep up with what's changing as well.
It really can be. I have clients that come to me and say, "Oh, have you heard about this diet? Have you heard about this?" And I always say, "No." With my work, I follow the research. I don't follow the trends. I don't follow the trends. I never keep up with what's trending, because it's a trend. And a lot of times it's not even healthy or sustainable, or is going to work long term and potentially will create more problems. And so I don't follow that. I do follow the research. But as a consumer, if you don't know where to look, or if you're not taking continuing education classes, probably like you and I are, and have formal education in this, it can feel so overwhelming. And so, and overwhelm makes you want to do nothing, right? So when you start to get overwhelmed, you're going to say, I'm just not going to worry about this, or you're just going to go on autopilot. But I do think having someone that can guide you through and help you see through, the smoke and mirrors and exactly what you should be doing, and give you a plan that's custom to you, because what my body needs isn't going to be exactly what your body needs. And that's another big misconception is, oh, well, we're all women, or, maybe in the same age category. We probably all need about the same amount of food, the same amount of protein. And I don't agree with that. I think we're all very much so unique. Our lifestyles, our body composition, our metabolic health, as we discussed, our hormonal health. And so you may need more protein or a little less protein, or more carbs or a little less carbs, and same with fat. But we can figure out for you what you need, and then you can just not pay attention to any of the other dieting information out there. And that's probably the number one thing my clients love the most, is finally saying, I don't have to worry about it anymore. I used to feel like I always needed to bounce to the next diet because this one, the one I was on, wasn't working. And now I know exactly what I need to do. So that's all I focus on. I have no desire to focus on the new diet, or what I should be eating at this time or that time, because I know exactly what to do.
Mm. I wholeheartedly agree that, having those basic principles, but then individualizing them for the person in front of you is super important. And before we finish off our podcast, I always like to ask my guest if there's one piece of advice that you could give that our listeners could go off instigate straight away after listening to this podcast, what would it be?
I would say, specific to what we talked about today, just get started with one thing. Either it be one tip that I shared with you today, maybe changing your workouts around, doing less cardio and more strength training, eating differently, working on that protein at every meal, shooting for 35 grams of fiber, changing that one habit that can improve your body, but do one thing right now. Maybe it's subscribing to my podcast, or maybe doing a masterclass you've hosted, Kate, maybe speaking on some of these topics that we covered. But do one thing. As soon as you take action, you start to see what's possible. And then you start to see in real time that you are getting one step closer to where you need to be. But start really small. Don't do 10 things. Just start with one and then build from there. So take action today, because truly that one thing is going to have a domino effect from there. And it's going to lead you down a road of true transformation. But you have to start now. Don't wait until later, or when your kids are older, or when you get a new job or you move. Do it right now, because time goes by so fast. And I truly do believe everyone deserves to feel like their healthiest version of themselves. And it really does start with just taking action and doing one thing.
Well, I love it. It's really keeping it simple, isn't it? Making, as we said before, you don't want to feel overwhelmed, otherwise you won't do anything. So just really try to narrow it down, pick one thing, stick to that, and then build on it from there as you build more confidence, or it becomes a habit and you can really just make it part of your everyday life. Now, I want to say a big thank you to you for coming on the podcast. Where can our listeners reach out and connect with you?
Yes. So I have a podcast. My podcast is Cheers to Your Success on all major podcasting platforms. I release once to sometimes twice per week. I speak on hormones, metabolism, exercise, mindset, pretty much everything we talked about here today. I'm also on Instagram. My Instagram is Ashley_Fillmore, Fillmore1. And then you can also find me at my website, and that's where all of my different programs and other things that I offer. Hormone assessment is there, a metabolic damage quiz. If that's an interest to your audience, they can find that there as well.
Amazing. Well, I'll link that all up in the show notes. So listeners, definitely head across there. Check out Ashley. She's a wealth of information. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much for having me.